Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, first of all, I wanted to say thanks to all my most recent subscribers and people that have been watching my videos and thumbs up, the video. Thank you all so much. I heavily appreciate it. It means a lot to me. So, thank you all very much for the support and all the new subscribers and support that I've recently received. I appreciate it very much. But, anyways, today I wanted to really get into kind of an interesting conversation. Not going to be a very long one, only about 15 minutes probably, but I wanted to talk about a potential fight between Demetrius Andrade and David Benavidez. Because from what I'm hearing, I believe that Demetrius Andrade said that he's going to move up to 168 pounds. Apparently, he's going to try to do that to try and chase after Canelo, a fight that apparently or allegedly, he's been looking after for a very long time. Now, when it comes to Demetrius Andrade, one thing I will say is this. Do I believe that he is somewhat avoided? I personally do. I think that Yemi Munguia did avoid him. I do think that Jamal Charlo is not serious about facing him. It did seem like, at least from what I've seen, the research that I did, that Billy Joe Saunders did not want to fight him. So, it is what it is. And even Canelo Alvarez, who I hold in very high regard, I have him as the number one pound for pound fighter. Canelo has not really expressed a great amount of interest in facing a Demetrius Andrade, possibly because of his tricky style. But, in my opinion, and I know the Demetrius Andrade fans, they always come up with something. They always say, well, these guys, man, they're just trying to age him out and nobody will fight him and all that sort of stuff. Well, bottom line is this. I've seen some very heavily avoided fighters in my day. And usually, even they are able to get some big fights later on down the line, like a Guillermo Rigondeaux, like an Erislandy Lara, like even a Gennady Golovkin, who was avoided there for a little bit. Not avoided by every single body, but he was avoided by Sergio Martinez. He was avoided, in my opinion, by Canelo there for a little bit at least. He was avoided by Peter Quillen. That's another fighter that he was avoided by. And there was probably a couple of others that I can't remember. Carl Frost might have been another one. So Golovkin was a little bit avoided as well. But when it comes down to it, what I'm going to say is this. In my opinion, when you're an avoided fighter like that, you have to try and trap some of these bigger names in the corner. And what you're going to have to do is that, now Demetrius Andrade says that he wants to, face all the belt holders and all that stuff. That's not necessarily going to work. I mean, it would be if they were willing to face you, but apparently they're not willing to face you. That's what you say. That's what your fan base says. And I think to a certain degree that is the truth. But if that's the truth, you're going to have to start facing some of these guys that have a name. Now, in my opinion, if Demetrius Andrade wants to stay at 160 pounds, I believe Chris Eubank Jr. is at 160 pounds right now. I think that that's a great fight for him to take next. I think that would be a perfect fight. It's somewhat of a name. It's not, an A-plus fighter, or he's not an A-plus fighter. He's a decent fighter. He's usually been competitive, even in the losses that he's had. He was at least competitive in the Billy Joe Saunders one. The George Groves one I missed. So if someone can let me know on that one, that would be good. But when it comes down to it, that's a good name to go after next. But if Demetrius Andrade is going up to 168 pounds next, and if he moves up immediately, I would like to see him face a David Benavidez. I would love to see him face a David Benavidez. And now that I look at the performance that he had yesterday against Liam Williams, and a certain amount of people I've heard, certain people, make excuses and say, well, he just got bored, and overall, he just, he didn't take him that seriously. Well, what I'm going to tell you is this. I believe that Demetrius Andrade is one of those fighters, and this is one thing I've noticed about him. He does fight to the level of his competition, and there's just certain fighters that are like that. A fighter that can be a little bit like that is Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury, who in my opinion is an A-grade fighter, one of my top 4 pound-for-pound fighters on my pound-for-pound list. Tyson Fury is a guy who can somewhat fight to the level of his competition. Terrence Crawford, even in some of his fights, who I have in my, I think, like number 3 pound-for-pound spot, number 3 and number 4, he can fight to the level of his competition. Meaning that, sometimes against the lower tier competition, you don't always show the best version of yourself. But then when you're motivated for a fight, when you find your opponent to be a very high threat, that's when you look your best. You look your best when someone can pull the best out of you. That's basically what that means. But what I'm going to say is this, because a certain amount of people say, well, I don't think he took him seriously. Do I think that Demetrius Andrade took Liam Williams as seriously as he would take a Canelo or take a Charlo or take a Golovkin? No. But I do believe that he did take Liam Williams somewhat seriously. The way that he talked about him before in the interviews, the way that I seen him try to box from round one, he was not as sloppy as I have seen him in other fights. Now, an opponent, at least from the highlights that I have watched, because I missed this fight, the Selecki fight, but I have watched highlights. The highlights that I've seen against Selecki, he didn't seem to respect Selecki really whatsoever. He was really sloppy in that fight in certain moments. It looked like really he was just trying to get that stoppage, at least from the rounds that I seen. But I watched this full fight against Liam Williams, and Demetrius Andrade looked decently calculated from round one. I think that he took Liam Williams a little bit more seriously than what most people are comfortable with saying. I believe that he took Liam Williams very seriously, and Demetrius Andrade, I think, just had a tough time with a fighter that was a decent athlete, with a fighter that had decent power, decent speed, and overall not a bad skill set. But obviously not an A-class fighter. Some would say not even a B-class fighter. But with Liam Williams' skill set, you would have to maybe debate that maybe he is a B-class fighter. What I'm going to say is this. I think Demetrius Andrade took Liam Williams a little bit more seriously than what most people would like to say. Because even when Demetrius Andrade was trying to fight his best fight, I still seen him have problems. And there was a couple of people that mentioned this, and I'm glad I'm not the only one that mentioned this. When Demetrius Andrade sometimes was up and close and personal with Liam Williams, I think at times he realized that he had to be, because there was times where he was getting hit even when he was on the back foot. Once again, Demetrius Andrade, this to me was actually more of a decently, defensive performance than in some of his other most recent fights. But when it comes down to it, still, even at his best, he can be hittable. It is not impossible to hit him. And he was hurt a couple of times, especially one time where I thought he was decently hurt in round 9. I think Demetrius Andrade, in all, I thought that he still clearly won the fight. Once again, do I think that maybe he can fight a little bit different against a Canelo or a Jamal? Could he possibly potentially look better against those guys or look like he's taking them more seriously? Could he have a different game plan? Of course, it's very possible. But I believe that Demetrius Andrade took Liam Williams a little bit more seriously than what most people are saying. That's just my personal belief. Now, a fight that I think is very interesting for Demetrius Andrade's next fight, in my opinion, is a David Benavidez. Now, David Benavidez, we all know his next fight. I can't remember the date, but it's going to be against, I think, that one Venezuelan fighter who used to be the IBF super middleweight champion once he defeated Andre Durrell, I believe, a little bit ago, or a while ago, I guess now. But Jose Uzcategui, I believe is his name. So David Benavidez is going to fight him next. That's an interesting fight. I just don't know if Jose is, I think that he was at the top of his game when he was in that Caleb Plant fight. He wasn't really overly impressive in the Caleb Plant fight, and he's kind of underwhelmed me a little bit in his last couple of fights. So I think David Benavidez most likely is going to beat him. I don't know if Uzcategui has ever been stopped in his career. There's a decent chance David Benavidez, in all honesty, might stop him. But after David Benavidez fights Uzcategui, and if Demetrius Andrade, from what I hear, if he is going to move up to 168 pounds to the super middleweight division, I think if Demetrius Andrade is serious about facing a certain amount of these top contenders, Demetrius Andrade should call out David Benavidez. Because this, thing to where Demetrius Andrade says, well, I want all the belt holders. I want all the belt holders. What he can't do if he goes up to 168 pounds, he can't just go there and basically say, well, I want all the belt holders. I want Canelo Alvarez. I want this guy. I want this guy. I want all the belt holders. Let's say maybe Canelo, let's just say somehow that Caleb Plant fight doesn't happen this year. And let's say, Caleb Plant still remains a champion. Well, I want Caleb Plant. And that's not a bad fight. But you need to take on some of the fighters that are willing to take on all comers, or some of the fighters that are willing to give you fights baby steps. And David Benavidez is not necessarily a baby step because I think that him and Demetrius Andrade are somewhere in the same pack. But when it comes down to it, what I'll say is this: it's a great fight. And from what I've heard in the past, Demetrius Andrade has not been too hot about possibly facing a David Benavidez. And it seems like in that fight yesterday against Liam Williams, he did have problems with Liam Williams' constant pressure. And to me, it really makes for an intriguing fight, David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade, because I think there are certain things that they could both expose about each other. They both have certain faults, and I think that Demetrius Andrade could potentially be a bad matchup for David Benavidez. I think that David Benavidez could potentially be a bad matchup for Demetrius Andrade, because David Benavidez is a very talented pressure fighter. I don't think his style of pressure is necessarily going to work against a Canelo Alvarez, because I just don't think that he has the entire skill set or the power to really, try to get Canelo out of there. And the thing is that Golovkin, I think, was able to do a good job pressuring Canelo Alvarez in that first fight and a little bit in the second fight as well, because Golovkin is a very special fighter. And I'm not saying that David Benavidez is not a special fighter, but he's not necessarily on the level of a Pete Golovkin, and a certain amount of people may disagree. But Golovkin not only was a decently great fighter because of his skill set, but because of his physical abilities. Gennady Golovkin had not just A grade power, A plus power. I seen him hurt Canelo Alvarez a little bit in both fights, and I rarely ever see Canelo Alvarez hurt. So that's something. Gennady Golovkin also has a granite chin. Probably the best chin that I've seen, at least when it comes to his prime. Prime and peak Gennady Golovkin, that chin is personally the best chin that I have seen in boxing for probably the past 10 years. And a certain amount of people may disagree, but Golovkin is up there, when it comes down to it. Debatably the best chin in the whole entire 2010s. Some may disagree. Of course, Mayweather had a decently great chin, and there was a couple of other fighters that I may be missing, Canelo too, but Golovkin might even beat out them. So when it comes to Benavidez, a certain amount of people might say, well, I think that his pressure style, it might give Canelo problems. I think Golovkin was able to give Canelo problems because of his skill set, his chin, and his strength. I don't think David Benavidez has necessarily the A-class skill set, first of all. And on top of that, I don't think that he has the chin. I don't think that he has the power to really threaten Canelo Alvarez in certain situations, because I think David Benavidez is going to try to go in there. And once again, it's a great fight. But I think David Benavidez is going to go in there. I think Canelo's going to hit him. And I think once he feels Canelo Alvarez's power, I think he's going to go, wow, this guy hits a lot harder than I think. I'm going to back up a little bit. And that's how I think the fight's going to go. I think David Benavidez actually is going to do a little bit more backpedaling in that fight than what a lot of people realize. That's just my personal breakdown of the fight. But David Benavidez against Demetrius Andrade, against a guy who is a decent power puncher, but I wouldn't necessarily call an A-grade power puncher when it comes down to the overall. What I'll say is this. That's a great fight, because David Benavidez puts on a lot of pressure when it comes down to it. He puts on a lot of pressure, and when it comes down to it, it would give Demetrius Andrade a lot of problems, I think. We just seen it a little bit in the Liam Williams fight, in a fight where I did think that he took him somewhat seriously. And now overall, Demetrius Andrade, he's got that slick style. He's a little bit rangy too. He's going to be around David Benavidez's same size. This is a very intriguing fight. And I think that if they are serious, as they claim, about facing a certain amount of these top contenders and getting that Canelo Alvarez fight, they should go after each other. And Demetrius Andrade, within the next year, if he is moving up to 168 pounds, or even if not, because 168 is not too far away, I should hear Demetrius Andrade call out a David Benavidez. And that's personally my thoughts. Let me know what you guys personally think about this fight. Let me know overall how you think this fight would go down. Who would you personally give the advantage to in this fight between a David Benavidez or a Demetrius Andrade? Let me know and why. I think that this is a great fight. I think you really cannot get a better fight for these guys. So let's hope that this fight happens. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.